Good afternoon. I'm Michael David Fox. I'm the director of Georgetown Center for Eurasian, Russian, East European Studies series, which is hosting this event. Our sponsor is the Carnegie Foundation of New York. And Russia Brief is organized and moderated by Jill Dougherty. She is an adjunct professor at Ceres, former CNN White House correspondent, State Department correspondent, and Moscow bureau chief. And today, Jill is in Moscow again for CNN covering this current crisis. We're all watching as grave events surrounding Ukraine unfold. This discussion is timely and important. So Jill, over to you in Moscow.
Thank you very much, Michael. And yes, greetings from Moscow to all of our audience and to Michael and to our guests. I didn't expect to be here, believe me. I just got here yesterday. And I am ensconced in a little room where they keep equipment because the Wi-Fi is better here. So in any case, hello, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. You know, we will, and this is kind of breaking news, I'm very glad to say that we will have the honor of Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova, and she will be joining us, we believe, in about a half an hour. So we, if that happens and everything works fine, we can extend the time of this discussion, but we'll go for at least an hour and maybe a bit more to make sure we get in everything. And today we have two of absolutely the best people to discuss this. I'm sure many of you probably know them already, but just for the record, I'll give a brief introduction of both of our guests. Ambassador William Taylor is Vice President, Russia and Europe at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And he, in 2019, served as chargé d'affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. He served as U.S. ambassador to Ukraine from 2006 to 2009. And before that, he was coordinator of U.S. assistance to the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. And then we also have Thomas Graham, a distinguished fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He is a co-founder of the Russian, East European and Eurasian Studies program at Yale University. And he was special assistant to the president and senior director for Russia on the NSC, the National Security Council staff, from 2004 to 2007. And during that, he managed a White House Kremlin strategic dialogue. From 2002 to 2004, he was director for Russian affairs at the staff. So again, these are highly qualified people, and they are watching, as we all are, what's happening. I can tell you, it's here in Moscow right now. It's 9:30 p.m. roughly, and events have been moving very, very quickly. I'll just give you a quick idea, both in Moscow and in Kyiv. There has been shelling in Ukraine along that line of control between Ukraine and the breakaway region of Donbass. Then Russia responded to the United States' response to Russia's demands on European security. And in one word, it wasn't very positive, although those discussions probably will continue. But essentially, Moscow is saying, you didn't answer our demands. And then finally, there are many things, but also Russia is expelling a senior US official from the embassy. So with that breathless introduction, let's get into this discussion. You know, Bill, maybe we can begin with you. You obviously are a military man in addition to a diplomat. And we know that there are at least 150,000 Russian troops on the border with Ukraine, massive amounts of equipment and weapons. And now we've had this shelling today, which has really picked up. In fact, the reports are that a school was hit. And so this, you know, there are real concerns that something like this, which could be a smaller incident, none of the children were killed, but people were wounded. And an incident like this could ignite a major conflict or a Russian incursion. So let's just start with that. What's your level of concern right now at this hour?
No, I'm very concerned. Not so much about the about this shelling on the line of contact, because that goes on it's gone on for 8 years. It has been, at a low level recently. The conflict, of course, the combat was horrible in 2014, 2015, when thousands of people were killed. Since 2014, 14,000 people have been killed. Ukrainians, we don't know how many Russians, probably a good number, but that number is, and that fact is suppressed, so we don't really know that. But lately, there have been shelling in both directions over the past several years. It does sound like there might have been an increase in that. The OSCE, the Special Monitoring Mission of the OSCE, keeps track of these things as much as they can. I say that because they're not allowed to go into certain places on the occupied side of the line. So we don't really know that the press carried that shelling of the attack on the kindergarten. As you say, fortunately, apparently the children were upstairs, and it was downstairs that got the blast. Fortunately, they weren't killed. But so I've been to that village, Luhansk, Donetsk, on the northern part of the occupied territory, and it's in the government controlled territory. So the OSCE tries to figure out where the shelling is coming from. I have a hard time. But back to your first question, yeah, I'm very concerned, less because of the line of contact, but more because there is this enormous force, as you just described, 150,000 troops arrayed on maybe 3.5 borders of Ukraine, northeast, south, and even southwest, who are poised, but haven't yet been deployed across the border to move at any time. So they're clearly prepared. My expectation, my guess is that President Putin has told his generals and Minister Shoigu, do everything you need to do, make every move, make every step, the information warfare, the moving of airplanes, the moving of, medical supplies, do everything you need short of going across that border. And so that does make me worried. On the other hand, I think if that hypothesis is true, then President Putin may not yet have decided to actually pull the trigger. And then your question about a possible spark is relevant. Could happen in Donbass, could happen anywhere else, but so great cause for concern.
Mm-hmm. So we're kind of watching this on two fronts, I would say, the military and the diplomatic. And Tom Graham, I think I'm going to turn to you for the diplomatic side. So, Russia today telling the US and NATO, you haven't met our demands. And essentially what they're talking about is a big revamp of European security. I think I watched as I was listening to Minister Lavrov, the foreign minister, this morning, and he said the issues that the United States wants to talk about in NATO are isolated. He called them isolated issues. We want the whole thing. But he's not saying this is it, we're pulling the plug. He's saying we're going to continue. So, Tom, what do you think? I mean, you're now your bailiwick of this diplomatic side of it. Good news, bad news? Does it continue? Does it go anywhere? And maybe even, does Russia really want to resolve it diplomatically?
Good set of questions. Let me add something to what Bill just said. He's absolutely right about the military side of this. But you're in Moscow, Jill, and be interested in what your perspective is. But if you look at this from the political standpoint, the Kremlin clearly hasn't taken the steps that you would expect it to take to mobilize the Russian population for a major military conflict at this point. There's a lot about Ukraine. There's a lot about what the United States and our NATO allies might be doing to goad Russia into a military conflict. But the line coming out of the Kremlin consistently is we have no intention of invading. Public opinion polls show that the Russian population is concerned about war. They don't want to engage in a military conflict. Many of the people that I've talked to Russians over the past several months have also indicated that there's no public support for a military conflict at this point. They're looking for a diplomatic solution. Now, I'll get back to what Lavrov has done in just a minute, but another important element of this is that there is something of a debate going on in Russia as to what the way forward is, and many people proposing sort of diplomatic compromises that would provide a way out of this conflict. And again, it's interesting, if the Kremlin had really decided that it was doing a military operation, you would expect that to be closed down, closing the ranks and mobilizing the public for it. Now, on the diplomatic side, we are engaged in some sort of diplomatic dance at this point. President Putin said that earlier this week at his press conference with German Chancellor Scholz. Lavrov repeated that today. President Biden has always made it clear that the United States is prepared for a diplomatic track as well. But it's clear that we're very, very far apart, and we're talking about different things at this point. In the United States, we're focused on the Ukraine crisis. In Russia, they don't talk so much about the Ukraine crisis. The crisis in European security broadly construed. And what the Russians are trying to do, and their demands have made it clear, is to revise the political settlement that was made 30 years ago at the end of the Cold War, at a time when Russia thought it was weak and had this peace imposed upon itself. Now that it's regained some of its strength, now that it's articulated more clearly what it thinks its interests are, it wants to begin to reverse that. The demands that they've made in the extreme demands are obviously non-starters for the United States, as far as pledges of no further expansion of NATO eastward, but more importantly, this idea that NATO should withdraw its infrastructure back to where it was in 1997 when the NATO Founding Act was issued, just isn't going to go down very, very well. So we do have diplomacy at this point. I think it's serious at one level. The problem we have is that what we're seeing now is very much public diplomacy, something the Russians themselves started by releasing those two documents that they passed on to the United States within 48 hours of having handed them over. These two draft treaties for the United States and with NATO. They are almost certainly behind the release of our reply and making that public. And now they've just made another reply and quickly issued that in public as well before the United States had a chance to digest it. That strikes me as not serious. I think this is for public consumption. You can't negotiate something as serious, these set of issues, in the public glare. What one would hope, but we don't know, is whether there's indeed a real negotiating channel that has been opened up. Something that's confidential, outside of the public glare, where we can discuss a series of very significant and sensitive issues. I believe that the issue of European security architecture needs to be on the table. It's clear that we have to find a way forward that makes Russia a stakeholder in this, or we're going to be exposed to intermittent crises of what we're seeing right now over the next several years. But as I said, you won't be able to do that in public. It's something that has to be done in private channels.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very glad now, as I'm looking at the screen, I can see Ambassador Markarova. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I don't know, you probably don't have a lot of time because you're very busy, but we'll make sure if you could unmute yourself and we will hear what you have to say. Really glad that you can join us.
Hello. Hi, thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. And especially, I mean, this is a very sad day for us because this morning started with shelling of Ukrainian villages, not only Stanitsa Luganske, which everyone is talking about because that's where they shelled the musical school, the kindergarten. And all these shots are coming from by missiles or by tanks from the uncontrolled territory, i.e. from Russia-led and backed forces. So it's a, gross violation of the Minsk agreements, but also for the first time during recent times, this violation of ceasefire is actually in a form of targeting the civilian infrastructure. So as of 4 p.m. Kiev time, there were 42 incidents, out of which the majority were with the weapons prohibited by Minsk Accords. And unfortunately, it's ongoing. So we have some wounded people already among civilians, first and foremost, but also, from what I know, 2 military soldiers have been wounded. And it just shows that, we don't see any credible sign from Russia that they are ready to de-escalate and that they are ready to give up on their intent to further their aggression. Now, I would like to remind everyone, I mean, we all know what's going on here, but, for us, it's not a new situation. Russia attacked us in 2014. Russia illegally occupied, or as they say, annexed Crimea. Russia started the conflict in Donetsk and Lugansk. And even in this recent document that they made public, that their response to the United States and NATO, I mean, everything that you can read there on Ukraine is absolutely false. There was no coup in Ukraine. We have the second democratically elected president. We just want to develop as our own country, free, sovereign, within our borders, with the decisions that we want to make ourselves, with our Euro-Atlantic aspirations. It's the decision that's supported, it's a dream that's supported by the majority of Ukrainians to be part of European Union, to be part of NATO, but most importantly, to be Ukrainians and not to be denied to have our own country and to have our own peace and to decide how we want to live in our own country. Because of that civilizational choice, we have Russia that attacked us in 2014, that was pressuring us all this time. And now since last April, we have this escalation. And as of today, we have, depending on what distance do you measure, but we have 150,000 plus additional troops and military equipment around our border in East, in Belarus, and in our Crimea, which is occupied by Russia. And from the tone of all the communications there, we do not see any signs of escalations. So this attack and this pressure has already effect on our economy. Of course, the resilience that we have built because of the reforms and actions during the past 8 years allows us to go through it right now without visible deterioration. But it's hard work, it's additional resources, and plus, all of us are preparing for what's going to be next. So,
Madam Ambassador, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I thank you very much. That, in fact, you covered a lot of ground there, and I think obviously very well explained Ukraine's position. I have a question. I mentioned at the top before you joined us that I'm in Moscow, so I'm listening to what the Kremlin is saying and the Russians, and I do have a question about Minsk. But just getting back to this incident today of the shelling and hitting that kindergarten, as Ambassador Taylor mentioned, this is frequent. Things have happened. It's very, very sad, but there's been frequent shelling, actually for 8 years now, with even more serious conflict. But there is, at least from the perspective here in Moscow, the sense of timing, that all of a sudden we have what looks like an increase in the violence. And we also have diplomatically a moment where Russia is responding to the United States. So it feels like kind of an important timing issue. So my question would be, how concerned are you that this could spin out of control, not because the sides necessarily want it even, but that there might be some hotheads who would want to turn this into, a conflict which no one could stop.
Well, let me be very clear here. There is only one hothead, and there is only one person calling shots here, and it's Mr. Putin. So it cannot, it was initiated by Russia. It was executed by Russia today. It was only them who was shooting and shelling. The Ukrainian army and all Ukrainians are showing such an incredible resolve and not responding even when our civilian infrastructure is targeted. Kids and 2 teachers were inside the room today. So that's why we need all the eyes on the ground. That's why we need more OSCE people present there. That's why we would like everyone who can be there and witness it. We are ready to give access to anyone because we are the ones who know the truth. And we want everyone to witness it and report the truth together with us. So believe me, our very capable and trained and battle-tested army will never overreact. We will defend our country if they cross the line. Even now, when they're shelling into our villages, as you see, we keep the resolve. We are informing everyone and we are calling on everyone to condemn it. But it can only spin under control in one situation only. If Mr. Putin will give an order to spin it under control, out of control from his side.
Mm-hmm. I think there's an important clarification that I would like to get from you. Over the past couple of days, we've been hearing some comments by Ukrainian officials who have seemed to indicate, but it's never really clarified, that there might be some membership. Whoops, sorry. That there might be some negotiation that Ukraine would be open to on potential membership in NATO. In other words, that Ukraine might say, well, we still want to join, but maybe we can put this off for 10 years, etc. Others have said, no, there is no way that that's going to happen because membership in NATO is part of the Ukrainian constitution. So can you just clarify, where is the position on NATO membership, and is it negotiable in your view?
Yes. First, let me clarify that there were no couple of officials. There was only one statement that was discussed by our ambassador in the UK, where it was taken out of context. The second incident that was published by the Financial Times by Andrew Kramer, he actually misreported it because the Vice Prime Minister Vereshchuk never said it. She was talking about the referendum on the Minsk Accord, and she never discussed it on NATO. It was on the record, and I believe that article is not already available on the New York Times, because not Financial, New York Times, because we have actually sent the video materials and asked them to show us the place where it was said, because it was never said. So it was only one accident, which, not accident, but when our ambassador in London was discussing it, and it was taken out of context. After that, we have communicated very clearly, the president, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, and pretty much everyone from Ukraine, that our position on that subject remains unchanged. Our Euro-Atlantic aspirations and the desire to join NATO is something that is shared by the majority of Ukrainian population. So if you compare to Ukraine in 2008, or if you compare even to any other countries in the region that are discussing the NATO membership at the moment, we have more than 60% of Ukrainians who either strongly support or do not object to joining NATO. And to be frank, after the invasion from Russia and after this attack and after the threats that we have to witness, more and more Ukrainians would be supporting us joining NATO, because we want to be part of the democratic European security system. So it was never discussed, and not only it's in our constitution, but it's in our constitution because that's what Ukrainian people want.
Mm-hmm. I would like to give our guests a chance to ask the ambassador, but since I have a quick moment that I can actually talk to you directly, I'd like to take advantage of it. There's one other thing, that you hear in Moscow, which is the Kremlin would say Ukraine is refusing to implement the Minsk Accords. And of course, those are the agreements, just for our audience, I'm sure they all know this, but the Minsk Accords were meant to solve the conflict in Donbass, to resolve the status, etc. But it appears that it's really, you have two diametrically opposed interpretations of the Minsk agreements. Ukraine looks at it one way, Russia looks at the other in terms of what happens first and what happens later. Can you just run us through that? Number one, is Ukraine refusing to carry them out? And then is it really more that they're interpreted in different ways, which makes it very difficult to solve?
Well, let me give you a quick answer for that. First, Ukraine is the one that actually complies with the Minsk Accords. It's actually Russia that doesn't, because one of the key elements of the Minsk Accords is ceasefire. And that's exactly what we see today. And that's exactly what we saw all these times. So as soon as Russia is ready to stop shooting at us, that's going to be the first step for the Minsk Accords execution on the Russian part. So we might like them or not, because again, we had to sign them in 2015, exactly in the situation when the gun was held to our head. But Ukraine, whether we like it or not, Ukraine has always stuck to the Minsk Accords. And everything that is there, and it's not a matter of interpretations. We just execute them the way they're written. But of course, if somebody is fantasizing about autonomy of Donetsk and Lugansk, which is not in the Minsk Accord, it says the special status. And that's exactly how we are ready to implement it. And we submitted numerous proposals of how that special status could be granted. So I guess, with Minsk Accords, as well as with ceasefire, as well as with, in general, stop of this aggression against Ukraine, the answer is whether Mr. Putin would be willing to do it. So on part of Ukraine, again, I guess, people who, let me now talk more about the context here. Contrary to Mr. Putin's articles, Ukraine is a separate country that has been independent, and it has been a separate country for centuries. The fact that we were occupied during the past 400 years by Russian empires or Soviet Union or others, and that we only restored our independence in 1991, does not mean that somebody can count as their sphere of interests. So the only thing that we want, and the only thing Ukraine is fighting for, is to be within our borders that are internationally recognized, be a sovereign country, and not be attacked or pressured or told by a foreign country, neighboring, but still foreign country for us, what we can and cannot do, who we can or cannot join. It should be up for Ukrainians to decide. We never attacked anyone. We never attacked Russia. We never threatened Russia. We are a very peaceful country, and all we need is for Russia to withdraw from our territory. And we are actually dreaming about times when we can be neighbors, but we will never be, again, part of, a prison camp, like we were in the Soviet Union.
Ambassador Taylor, do you have, since you were the ambassador, you want to kick us off here? Do you have a question for the ambassador?
Ambassador Markarova, great to see you. I'm sure you're busy. My question is, I mentioned to Jill before we even started, Ambassador, that you're perfect for this job. You're perfect for this job for all kinds of reasons. One reason you're perfect is your relationship with the IMF, your understanding of the finances, your understanding of the importance of international support for Ukraine right now in terms of sovereign guarantees coming from the United States or from loans coming from the IMF. Are you making any progress there? I mean, I hear the U.S. I hear Undersecretary Tory Newland says that they're working on a sovereign guarantee for $1 billion, and I would hope it would be $3 billion. But but they're working on that, and I understand that the Treasury is working with the IMF on this. Any progress? I know this crisis has been hard on the Ukrainian economy, the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian reserves. So how's that aspect coming?
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this question. Yes, it's very important. As you know, even though we have implemented many reforms, and especially in the public finance and monetary policy, and we have built very resilient banking system. So even after 2 years of COVID, almost 2 years, and now with this, since last April, with this increased military aggression, which is very visible, very public, markets do note it. And with all these articles published by Mr. Putin, or when was a couple of days ago, another article by Mr. Surkov, again about talking back about 1918. So all of that is taken into account, plus the Russian maneuvers in the Black Sea, trying to dominate there, of course, also have an effect on the exports, and Ukraine is very much dependent on the exports. We export from our Black Sea ports many of our agricultural products. And also just a quick thing here is that Ukraine is in top 5 of the food producing countries globally. I mean, sunflower, wheat, barley, sugar, you name it. So any disruptions that we are talking about here, it's not only bad effect on our economy, but it's also the security of the food supply, where Ukraine is a very important supplier. But you're absolutely right, as though we see that, the banking system has been very stable. They have shown that, again, as a result of the reforms, as the result of a good governance there, and the public finance system still operates, even though under pressure, but normally, but we already see big midterm and even some short-term negative effects on the financial system. That is why we're working very closely with all G7 countries, IMF, World Bank, and US has taken also a lead there in creating a package that could be a support package for this short period of time. But ultimately, even, again, we really hope that all the diplomacy would work and Russia would not attack further. But even if they remain where they are, that is a big pressure that will constantly be there. So you probably saw that the European Union announced 1.2 billion euros macro-financial assistance. US has announced 1 billion loan guarantee, and it's the first one, so we keep working. We also have announcements from Canada, from other countries, from France, that they will be able. It kind of reminds me, like in 2015, I was at the Ministry of Finance, and part of the team that was structuring the unprecedented IMF program together with all this bilateral support. It's very important because on the one hand, it will help the economy in the short term. On the other, it shows that our partners have trust in us, that they believe that providing us with this guarantees and loans and everything else, it's not a gift, it's they know that how resilient we are. They believe in our resolve to defend our country. Again, I really hope that our military and our people will not be put to this test. But I've been to Kiev recently when Secretary Blinken was visiting Kiev, and I have to tell you, people are not panicking there. People are signing up for the territorial defense. Just today, Ambassador, our common friend Max Nefedov signed up for the territorial defense in Kiev. And it's a binding contract, by the way. It's not something for show. You have to do it if you sign up. So we will resist, we will defend our country, but we spend 120% of our time and efforts right now for the diplomatic solutions to work, because we value each of our citizens and we don't want to lose any of them. And we know how devastating the effect of this, again, repeated period of the hot war would be. Having said that, we're not ready to give up on what is sacred to us. We're not ready to give up on the territorial integrity. We're not ready to give up on our people. And I have to remind you that 475 Ukrainians are today in prisons in Russia and in Crimea on false accusations. Crimean Tatars, religious leaders, Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses, you name it, Ukrainian activists. And we have an obligation and we have a duty to get all of them back. And we are not ready to give up on our dreams, and we're not ready to give up on, our sovereignty.
Tom Graham, could I ask you, you have a question for Ambassador Markarova?
Yeah, two related questions. And thank you very much for being here with us, Madam Ambassador. The first question I have is, how confident are you that NATO members, in fact, share your aspiration that Ukraine should become part of NATO? The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was in Kiev earlier this week, and then in Moscow. In Moscow, he said quite plainly in a press conference with President Putin that the question of Ukrainian membership in NATO was not on the agenda. So the question I have for you is, how long do you think it will take for Ukraine to persuade all 30 members of the NATO alliance that Ukraine is in fact worthy of being a member? In particular, how will you persuade Germany that that is indeed the case, or France, the two countries that were quite active in Bucharest in 2008 in ensuring that Ukraine did not get a membership action plan at that point? The second question I have is that you've talked about a diplomatic solution to the current crisis. From your standpoint, from the standpoint of the Ukrainian government, what is an acceptable diplomatic solution to the crisis that you think that Russia would agree to?
Thank you very much. Well, the first question is, I cannot tell you how much time it will take for Ukraine to get into NATO, because it takes 2 to dance, but in this case, it takes 31 to dance. But I can tell you that the one out of the 31, which is Ukraine, is definitely confident that we will do everything possible to develop our country according to the standards that are required by NATO. We are doing it right now. We are not only implementing the NATO standards in our military, but as you know, NATO is not a military alliance. It's much more than that. And everything that we have, democracy, freedom of press, everything that we believe in to start with, free economy, anti-corruption measures and everything else, we are doing it. And we are doing it not to join NATO or to join the European Union. We are doing it because it's necessary for Ukraine. So we will use the diplomacy there, and we will talk to all of our friends and allies. Some of them are more supportive than others, but it doesn't mean that, we will stop. And I will just use here the documents that we can refer to. So in every NATO summit, including the recent one, there was a confirmation from the NATO, all of NATO members, that the open door policy remains, that Ukraine will be at some point member of NATO, and that we all together will be working on it. So if anything, the question there is only one person who openly is against Ukraine and NATO, and that is Russian president. And he's the one who using every opportunity in order to, convince others, especially through, use of force or threat of energy force or others, in order for Ukraine not to be there fast enough. But again, for us, it's, we know what we want. We know what our people want, most importantly. I know that, so that's on the NATO. The second one on the diplomatic solution, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we say the diplomatic solution, we mean the solution without war, and that we are talking to, and we are ready to talk even to Russia, even given the fact that they attacked us. Now, if you imply that what is it that we are ready to give up in order for Russia not to attack us, I don't think it's a fair question for Ukraine. That should be a question to Russia or to others, you know, what is it that the world is ready to tolerate more for Russia to do in this situation? Because again, we did not do anything to cause it. We did not attack Russia. We never threatened Russia. It was Russia who attacked us. Russia is the only aggressor here. We are the victim of the Russia's actions. So we are looking for the diplomatic solution, and we keep repeating that even though we have the right, Crimea is Ukraine, Donetsk and Lugansk, all of it is Ukraine. Even though we have all the legal rights to our territories, we do not plan to get it back through military actions. We do not and never did plan any offensives. We are looking at diplomatic solution there. And President Zelensky has shown since 2019 a number of steps. You know, we built the checkpoints. We essentially were ready to discuss many humanitarian issues and other issues. We are ready to discuss the special status for Donbass in a way that it's acceptable for Ukraine and can be in accordance with our constitution. And plus, I want to remind you that after the Minsk Accords has been signed, Ukraine has adopted in 2016 a law in decentralization. All of our oblasts now have special statuses. They have unprecedented budgetary decentralization, freedoms and responsibilities. But you know, the questions to both of those questions, answers to both of those questions are very much, especially for the second one, on the diplomatic solution. They are all dependent on what Mr. Putin and essentially Russian people want. Because again, it's, I know you said previously that Russian people do not support the military actions and do not support war, but yet, after all this getting troops around our border and all the aggression and all the killings that has been in this during the past 8 years, we are yet to see many demonstrations in Russia. We are yet to see people demanding the peace talks. So it seems like, you know, it's not really on the agenda, as you said.
Madam Ambassador, I know your time is very valuable. Can you stick around for just a few more minutes? I wanted to give Michael David Fox a chance to ask a question if he has one. And I can already see that people are putting questions. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, that if our audience has questions, you can put them in the Q&A function, and I will read them and cull them and present them. And if it's a question to a specific person, please mention that. But Michael David Fox, who is the head of Series, Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies. Thank you, Michael, if you have a question.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Ambassador Markarova, for coming today. My question actually is both for you and the other commentators, but you mentioned President Putin's historical tract on centuries of Russian-Ukrainian history. I wonder how this has been received and discussed in Ukraine. I've read a report that this tract has been distributed to soldiers in the Russian army. And in terms of this discussion about Russia's intentions, which we began before you came, this is a question for everyone. Doesn't this show a certain degree of planning and preparation well in advance of recent weeks?
I completely agree with you. We believe that that article was coming out right after the escalation started in April, not by you know, mistake at that time. Everything that is written in that article, unfortunately, is not correct if you look at the history, but it's a very correct as a record of what Mr. Putin thinks. So it's not something new. We heard from Mr. Putin before that he believes that the solution of the Soviet Union has been the greatest mistake, and everything else, that we are one nation somehow, Russians and Ukrainians, and other myths. Well, it was received in Ukraine in only one way it could have been received. I mean, we learn our true history, not the falsified one that was taught during the Soviet times. We know the Ukrainian history very well. Not only we know it, we can observe it in our daily lives. We live in Kyiv, where our country has been founded. We live among churches that are many years old. We know, our history, and we know where we trace it back to. And we also know what happened during the Soviet occupation. We all know about Holodomor, when millions of Ukrainians have been killed by artificial hunger, the genocide organized by the Soviets. We know about our independence in 1918, when Ukraine won independence, exactly the same year with Finland, when we together were in the members of the League of Oppressed by Russia people. Unfortunately, we did not remain independent like Finland did this after 1918. But in 1918 to almost 20, we had our government, we had our country, we had our money, we had our central bank, we adopted labor code and everything else. We regained independence and we again occupied by the Russia. So, it was received as it was received. We know that whatever is written there is not the truth, but like a declaration of war, and essentially statement that Mr. Putin believes that we are not a real country. This is not truth.
So Michael, if I could just say just a couple of quick points on that. Is that all right, Jill?
Sure.
As the ambassador said, this is an indication of what President Putin thinks, what at least Vladimir Putin thinks about Ukraine. And this is important because right now, Putin has the decision to pull the trigger and invade or back down and negotiate. Even if he backs down and negotiates, which would be a good thing. Everybody wants him to do that. And I still hope he will. I'm still better than even odds that he'll go that route. Even if he does, we know from that statement, that 5,000 word statement of last summer, that he will never give up. That he will never give up on trying to destabilize Ukraine, that he will never give up on trying to reabsorb Ukraine and put them back in the prison, as the ambassador just said. So what that means is, even if he backs down this time, he'll be back, and that the international community needs to support Ukraine militarily, diplomatically, financially, politically, for a long time, so that they can achieve their goals that the ambassador just, they just want to be a normal European country. They don't ask that much. They just want to be able to do that. And that we have an obligation, I think, to help them do that, because we know what Putin wants. And we know even if he backs down this time, he'll be back.
Tom Graham, could I keep moving here, because I know the ambassador doesn't have a lot of time. And another question came in. In fact, I see everyone is champing at the bit to ask questions of the ambassador while she's here. I'll take one from Dr. Angela Stent, who of course we all know, the former head of series before Michael David Fox, and a great Russia expert. And she says, what more could the United States be doing to help Ukraine? Works perfectly with the comments by Bill Taylor. Madam Ambassador?
I'm sorry, would you please repeat it? I didn't hear it.
Sure. What more could the United States be doing to help Ukraine?
Well, just continue and increase the excellent support that we are receiving now. So help us to build our defense capabilities. And we are very thankful for the unprecedented support that we received in 2021, the $600 million worth of military defense equipment, including lethal. Again, we all pray to God that we will never have to use them. but building the defense capability is very important for us to know that if in the unfortunate event we will have to defend our country, that we have that capability there. So we continue to work with our partners and allies, with the United States, but with other countries as well, in order to build all of our capabilities, including the naval capabilities. Second is the financial support, which is very important, because building our country and developing Ukraine as a prosperous country is very important also for us. We want democracy to deliver for Ukrainian people. We want Ukrainian people to live prosperous. We want Ukrainians to become much better off. You know, this is a big difference. You know, the focus of the government is actually to improve the ordinary lives of Ukrainians. This is what they have elected and appointed us for. And the third is actually, you know, the political, you know, cooperation. We have signed last year the strategic partnership charter with the United States, a new one since 2008. It's a very comprehensive one, and it essentially lays out a ground for a number of cooperation in climate change fight, in energy cooperation, economic, cultural. I mean, all of this. I mean, I wish we could be just a boring country that nobody is talking about on headlines, but focusing on all of this, on developing cultural ties, on building our education, healthcare. We have so much to do in our country, and we have so many plans with all the democratic countries around the world. And instead, you know, of focusing on that, we have to focus on something that you think people should not face in the 21st century. Fight for their own existence.
You know, there's a question in the Q&A, which I think reminds me very much of the essential question. I actually wanted to ask it, so maybe I'll ask it now. But let's start with Tom Graham. Madam Ambassador, are you okay to stick around for a little bit longer?
Maybe just one question, and I have to be on the phone call in like 5 minutes, and I have to walk.
Then let's ask you, and then Tom can pick up when you have to leave. Okay, so the question is from Trevor. Assuming Putin is a rational actor, what does he expect to gain from a Ukrainian invasion? Security concerns don't seem legitimate, given other NATO members' proximity to Russia. Is it solely for a return to glory for Russia? So what's Putin's aim here?
There is an answer in that question. If you act rationally, there is no gain in this, neither for Ukraine nor for Russia.
What about the glory or, you know, a broader mission for Russia?
Well, it's not a glory. It's a very, you know, you just, I will come back to the article that Mr. Putin wrote. The dream of restructuring, reconstructing the Soviet Union, there is no glory to it, unfortunately. So, you know, it's very hard for me to comment on it because, you know, our values are different. Our values are quite opposite. We don't need to attack anyone to feel happy. We need to feel happy. We need to have peace, work, grow wheat, you know, raise kids, plant trees, the boring stuff. We like it, Ukrainians.
Well, we don't think you're boring, but I take your point. Thank Madam Ambassador. I can't thank you enough. And I'm sure our listeners and participants are really happy that you were able to join us. We wish you good speed and thank you again.
Thank you very much for excellent questions, and please pray for peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Can
So
I
we bid farewell to Ambassador Markarova, but I wanted to pick up, if I could, Michael, did you have something? Or
I just wanted to, on that last point of recreating the Soviet Union, you know, Russia was recently in Kazakhstan and pulled back, and there was a discussion about whether the aim was to kind of, with Belarus, with Kazakhstan, but Thomas Graham mentioned, the reordering of the security structure as the goal on the table. So I think there's a lot to discuss there.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe, Tom, let's start with you, because, you know, this is the question. This war has been going on, the conflict in Donbass for 8 years, 14,000 Ukrainians dead. And it feels like all of a sudden, although I think Vladimir Putin would say, look, we've been talking about this for a long time, but it does feel that this came up unexpectedly, that we are in this very dire situation. So what does Putin want, and why is it coming to a head now?
Well, you know, as I've already said, I do think that Putin wants a revision of the settlement that was reached in 1991, which he believes was imposed on Russia in a time of its strategic weakness. What exactly that looks like is hard to say at this point, but clearly one of the primary goals, I think, of his policy at this point is to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. Whether that means that Ukraine is anchored in a Russian sphere of influence or not, I can't say at this point. But clearly to prevent Ukraine from moving further westward, certainly militarily. Why now? You know, I think there are a number of reasons that have led to the decision to move on this now. Some of it, and they come in sort of three buckets. First is on the domestic political side in Ukraine. President Zelensky has been much more active in pursuing what the Kremlin would see as a anti-Russian agenda, going after pro-Russian forces in Ukraine, Viktor Medvedchuk under house arrest, closing down 3 Russian sort of sponsored or Russian supported TV stations, for example. I think that Russia has disapproved of Zelensky's very sort of public effort to put pressure on the allies to move forward on the issue of NATO expansion, NATO membership for Ukraine. And then third, in that regard, also the Crimea platform of trying to rally international support or attention on the Crimea issue and creating pressure for Russia to return Crimea to Ukraine. So those are things that Zelensky has done. I think in addition, there have been things that have happened on the security side. Ukraine has been granted an enhanced opportunities partnership with NATO. We've seen much more active NATO engagement in Ukraine over the past several months, past couple of years. More active exercises in the Black Sea. And Putin, as some people have said, is worried not only about Ukraine and NATO, but NATO and Ukraine. So that is the second bucket. And then the third, quite frankly, has to do with the arrival of a new administration in Washington, an administration that is not nearly as unpredictable as the Trump administration was, but a sense that you know, for whatever the president might say in public, that he's pragmatic and that you can cut deals with him if you create the right circumstances. I'm sure that the chaotic exit from Afghanistan in the summer and fall also factored into this, as well as the ongoing energy crisis in Europe, which I think led the Kremlin to believe that this was a point where they had perhaps maximum pressure. And so what they've done, and remember that they built up the forces around Ukraine in the spring of last year. That got President Biden to agree to a summit that he hadn't planned, certainly not that early. So that is evidence of sort of pragmatism on the president's part that it works in Russia's favor. And they've continued that. And you know, from the Kremlin standpoint, they are engaged in a war of nerves at this point. They've maintained the tension. Putin told his diplomats back in November that a certain amount of tension was good because that way the West had to focus on Russia. They couldn't forget about Russia and focus all their energies on dealing with that long-term strategic challenge that China poses. And he's going to continue to maintain this pressure. I don't believe that Putin wants to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. You know, what people have said is absolutely right. The risks are tremendous. It's hard to see what he gets out of it. But if he can maintain this tension, if he can create a certain amount of instability in Ukraine, damage the economy, if he can use measures short of war, such as cyber attacks, which we've seen, also to increase that sense of anxiety in Ukraine, but also spark a discussion in the West about how much the West really wants Ukraine in NATO and what price is willing to pay to make that happen. All of this, I think, Putin believes will lead to a negotiation at the end where at least one of the key elements of that will be some sort of agreement. How it will be articulated is not clear at this point, that Ukraine is not going to become a member of NATO anytime in the near future. There are other aspects to this as well, but I think that is sort of the central aspect that Putin is thinking about this point. And of course, if Ukraine is not going to become a member in the near future, all the more so is that true of all the other former Soviet states.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You know, we were going to go for an hour. I said we could go for a little bit longer, but there are a few questions in Q&A. If both of our guests can stick around for 5 more minutes or so, is that okay? And
10 minutes is good.
Oh, all right.
10 minutes is that's good.
10 minutes is fine. Let's say 10 minutes. That's a deal. There is a question which I'm going to take the prerogative to answer because it's from Elliot Frankenberger, who's talking about the timing and, you know, this idea that Putin would not take military action until the end of the Beijing Olympics because he doesn't want to upstage his friend. You know, I would say, and I would presume that my colleagues here would agree that we don't know. I mean, you know, the timing, but I can tell you here in Moscow, last night on television, Russian TV, almost every channel was mercilessly mocking the idea of a deadline. And the deadline, of course, the original one was supposed to be, oh, he's going to invade on the 16th, which was, of course, yesterday. And almost every single channel had some sort of send up about, you know, the 16th, the thing that didn't happen. And there was one particularly funny part of video. There's a lot of mockery being used on a serious note in propaganda now, which is you don't have to, you know, bludgeon people. You just make fun of things. It's kind of a, I would say, more modern approach, and it's very effective. So there was a piece of video, an old comedy show in which this reporter is on the street and he comes ahead, and actually it was done way before Ukraine. And he goes up to a guy and says, well, I am here reporting live from the location of the thing that didn't happen. And we have an eyewitness here, you know, Ivan Ivanich, you saw something, tell me what you saw. And Ivan Ivanich goes, I saw it with my own eyes, nothing happened. So it was great stuff. But in any case, I don't think anybody knows. The question that I have.
So Jill, just on that point. So
Sure.
sorry, Tom. I'll be real quick. That's a success. If nothing, that's what we want. We want him to back down. We want him not to invade. That's a win. We want him to blink. Biden and Zelensky are not blinking. We want Putin to blink and go to negotiations. That's the whole goal. We want nothing to happen.
Well, yes, I presume that's one viewpoint. Of course, Putin would think, you know, well, maybe that was the plan all along. Who knows?
Putin wants to go to negotiations as well. The question is, what are the negotiations going to be about? Putin wants a more extensive agenda on the negotiations. And that's what he's planning for at this point. The question is whether from the Kremlin standpoint, the question is whether the United States will agree to that broader agenda and how much pressure Putin has to apply in order for the United States to agree to this broader agenda. Let's make one sort of very brief point. To the extent that we maintain this in the public sphere, there's not going to be a negotiated solution. Neither country is going to make the type of concessions on what they believe are core interests and core principles in a public debate. The only way we're going to move this forward is if we open up a confidential channel in some way. Where
But
you
Tom,
can
would you agree that just having I totally agree, it cannot be done in public, and it should be done in, in what you normally do. You've done these negotiations, we've done these negotiations. You don't do it in public, you do it in in Geneva, you do it in Vienna, and that's where it can happen. But if the question is, are the United States going to give up on principles like open door or Ukraine and NATO, I think the answer is no. But there are other things you can negotiate on.
Well, let me just make the additional point. Doing it in Geneva or Vienna keeps it in the public sphere, because there will be reporters that will glom onto this. There'll be press conferences and people will have to explain what the nature of the negotiations about. I think Russia's largely to blame for this, that we've created an atmosphere where you can't do those normal types of negotiations that we have done for decades during the Cold War and the post-Cold War period. So you have to set up something separate, something that is truly confidential, that the press, the public is generally not aware of, if you're going to be able to deal with these very sensitive issues. I think that goes for us, it goes for the Russians as well. And the question is whether behind all this cacophony that we see in public now, are there people who have reached that decision and in fact are doing something along those lines that hopefully we will never be aware of until some reasonable solution has been developed and is ready for public presentation.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've had negotiations on time here, and we promised Ambassador Taylor we would finish up expeditiously. So I think maybe, I'm sorry, we have a few more questions, but I think we will, because of time, have to end it here. But it was a great discussion, and thank you for rocking and rolling with it. And especially, it was fantastic to have Ambassador Markarova join us. It was very valuable, and we will thank her separately again. Thank you very much to our participants, Thomas Graham and William Taylor. Really wonderful to have your wisdom about this and your strong viewpoints about this. And Michael, I guess I'll throw it back to you. Thank you. Farewell from До свидания. До скорого.
I just want to say thanks for working so late in Moscow. Good luck with everything.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.